Welcome to Stranger Encounters. I'm Tommy Salmons. Today, our guest is Gord. Gord is a truck driver. He has been trucking since the young age of 18. He has driven across many countries, through many continents, and he has a different perspective for liberty than what your average person would be because of his experiences that led him to liberty. We had a really long and involved conversation here on a lot of different matters, and I think this episode will prove beneficial to all of you. So I hope you all enjoy this conversation with Gord. Well, I'm here with Gord. Hey, Gord, what's going on, man?
Mr. Salmons, what a pleasure to sit down and talk with a proper Southern gentleman.
Proper Southern, maybe, but I don't know about the gentleman.
So.
I think the gentleman part might be a little off, but well, I'll take the compliment. Well, I wanted to get started with your resume. I think it's interesting, and I think that it shows people where your mindset is coming from in talking about liberty. So, will you give us a little breakdown of your history and your resume?
Sure. So, yeah, for those who don't know, I've been a truck driver my whole life, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but I've managed to extend my adventures, so to speak, to other countries through various work visas and hustling. Born in Canada, grew up in Southern Ontario. Old man was a trucker. Both my uncles were truckers. Grandfather was a trucker and tank driver in the Second World War for the Canadian Army. Grew up around trucks. Didn't necessarily want to be a truck driver when I was in high school, but yeah, when I was 15, 16, I started working for this company in Ontario that my dad worked at. And I've just been on the road ever since. Got my Class A license when I was 18. Ran local around Toronto and Southern Ontario and started running Montreal and then started running Michigan. And then, yeah, pretty well been on the road ever since. Did some trucking in Australia and in New Zealand. Hauled logs in New Zealand for a company in the central North Island for about a year. Drove triple road trains in Western Australia, as well as 4 seasons on the ice in the Northwest Territories in Canada. Did a rock tour once with Kiss and Ted Nugent. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, we were both at that show. I remember talking to you about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is, oh my God, 2000. So yeah, 19 years ago. Oh man, yeah. Time flies.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, I sort of drove truck at Burning Man too. I drove an art project down there from Toronto, and I had been there previously a couple times, and I got hooked up with the people that distribute ice at Burning Man and kind of got myself a job shunting trailers between the 3 locations that deal ice at Burning Man and Gate. And yeah, so I kind of got paid to drive a semi around the coolest party on planet Earth. So that's kind of cool, I guess.
Yeah, that's absolutely cool. And a lot of people may not be impressed with your resume being a truck driver. Some people have kind of pejorative views of trucking in the industry. But the reason I wanted to cover, and we discussed this beforehand, the reason I thought it was interesting and important to cover your resume was because of the many different places and regulations that you had lived under in the trucking industry. And we got into a conversation yesterday about climate change, and neither of us are climate scientists. Neither of us have a really strong idea of what is reality and what is actually manufactured crisis. But you had a really interesting take on the trucking industry and how the regulations in the trucking industry are could adversely affect the climate if it isn't in fact man-made. So get into a little bit of your ideas and why you think the way you do about the trucking industry and how the regulations are actually bad for the climate as opposed to good for the climate, at least here in America.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of efficiency, and having, I've been all over the United States and Canada, and I've been to Europe a couple times, and then having drove in Australia, I've seen how efficiency could help with emissions, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And because like in Australia, throughout most of the country, but not all of it, they allow triple and quadruple road trains, which, you're getting more freight moved with less truck, right?
Mm-hmm.
And less burning of fossil fuels to accomplish the same objective. And then, you come back to the United States, and the discussion around emissions here, and like I say, I want to, back up your disclaimer that neither of us are climate scientists. I'm not like a climate change skeptic. I don't know anything about it. Or very little. But if we take it for granted that greenhouse gas emissions are contributing to the problem and the ultimate goal is to reduce them, I see the regulatory framework in the United States regards trucking as antagonistic to that goal, and the government's nebulous focus on technological innovations rather than efficiency of the system in total is, I guess, the way I would put it, because we have all these awesome roads here, and everyone's dragging around a tandem 80 grand truck, and there's no reason for that. Everyone says, well, the infrastructure can't handle larger, longer, heavier trucks. And I'm afraid to tell you, I'm calling bullshit, because every state in the union has got some kind of exemption for oversized, overdimensional heavy loads.
Mm-hmm.
Many states allow tandem 48 and 53 footers. Some people call them turnpike doubles. In Australia, they call them road trains.
Mm-hmm.
They're around in a few different states. Many states allow what in Canada we call a B train or a super B. So that's two trailers hooked directly together with no dolly. And in Canada, they're allowed to be 140,000 pounds gross, and it's one truck pulling it. So there's just all these different efficiency modes that could be employed that they're not, and I just don't see why. I don't see why they don't. I get it that each state is sort of responsible for its own DOT, and the feds only fund the interstate system, and they don't really have a mandate to dictate to states what to do with their roads. But it strikes me that, if climate change and tackling greenhouse gas emissions are as critical as the media makes it out to be, you would think that, like, along certain interstates, like you live down south, Interstate 10, from what I recall of my travels on it, doesn't have any major grades on it, at least from Arizona east. Interstate 40 is much the same. 80, once you get out of Pennsylvania all the way to Utah, really doesn't have any big hills. Why isn't there some kind of hump yard facility built along those stretches of highway or at the ends where you could assemble a double? Like I'm actually driving right now. I'm on the New York State Thruway, in between Rochester and Buffalo. And the New York State Thruway allows double 48 and 53s. And every exit, they have a hump yard where you can put trailers together. It wouldn't be too much of a infrastructure upgrade, or at least it wouldn't be too costly in the grand scheme of things to have more of those along interstates in various parts of the country. and increase the efficiency of the trucking fleet. Like, I don't see why they don't do that. You know, they want to like force all the engine manufacturers to come up with these, you know, regeneration units, or, you know, the DEF urea additive, or, you know, coming up with natural gas motors. They're always looking at it as a technological fix rather than a bigger picture system-wide efficiency fix, which I think would be a lot more helpful.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. And you know what it reminded me of? I heard a story a while back, and I'm going to try not to butcher this. I don't even remember. I can't remember if it was von Mises or Milton Friedman that I had heard give a speech and tell this story, or if it was about one of them. I can't remember exactly. So forgive me for not being brushed up on this. I didn't even expect for this to pop up, but the way you were discussing the efficiency and not being able to pull dual trailers or 53-foot doubles, I was thinking of the story when the gentleman is sitting with the labor secretary of China, and they're watching this jobs project go on, and you have a bunch of men out there digging with shovels, and he turns to the labor secretary and he says, "Why don't you get heavy equipment? You know, like that would make the job a lot quicker, you know, and you could dig these trenches a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently." And the labor secretary looked at him and he said, "Well, this is a jobs program." And he said, "Oh, okay, so if the goal is to employ more people, why don't you just give them spoons?" And that's kind of,
yeah, exactly.
That's kind of what I'm thinking here, is maybe these regulations, some of them are put in place because the companies feel like it's in their best interest to have more employees than more skilled employees. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I mean, those are some of the arguments. You know, obviously, you're a trucker, I'm a trucker. We've all sat around at a truck stop or at a warehouse or wherever shooting the shit with people. And that's usually the argument is, well, what about our jobs?
Mm-hmm.
You know? And I get it, but, like, life doesn't guarantee you a job, right?
Right.
There's not, you get shot out into the universe. There's nothing anywhere that says you must have a job or you must have this type of job. You know, the universe doesn't owe you anything.
Mm-hmm.
It never has, and it never will. And evolution of society and systems and technology is going to carry on regardless of you and your job.
Right.
Right? So that's, you know, I'm not even going to address that because it's stupid. And
Mm-hmm.
as far as the skills thing goes, well, yeah, man, I could go off on a tangent about truck driving schools and training and lack thereof in the United States and in Canada, and man, that's a messy subject. But like for those people who think that, like, you know, there's too many mewling cabbages behind the wheel, yes, you are correct, but also people can do this. You know, like the Australians run these huge trucks up and down the roads all the time, and they're the same people as us. There's no reason why people can't do this. You know, in fact, I'd go so far as to say that, you know, the roads and highways in Australia, at least off the East Coast, are a lot safer than they are in the United States.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, the efficiency thing, like, it applies to labor too, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, if you have, I mean, if you want to talk big picture savings to the economy, let's say you have one driver pulling two trailers. I mean, you're obviously not going to double his salary, but, like, you know, you give a guy an extra 10 or 15 cents a mile or whatever for pulling a set of doubles, and instead of having two guys getting paid 45 cents a mile or 50 or whatever the going rate is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's a cost saving. That's a cost savings to the company, to their customers and to the economy as a whole. And, you can't deny the benefit of that, right?
Right. No, and I think what, like, and maybe people don't understand why we're having this conversation, but what you've done is you've kind of like used trucking as an analogy to our entire social structure today, and I want to move kind of in that direction. And when you brought up the idea that that the universe doesn't owe you a job and it doesn't guarantee you a job, this is where the libertarian or liberty-minded people, whatever you want to call them, lose people. Because I'm only concerned with liberty. I don't trust the government to believe that their arbitrary power and their police forces and their military are there to keep me safe. I believe that they are there to do to pursue the goals of the government and the state, and not to protect me. And if it came down to it,
to advance,
yeah, no, and I was just going to say, if it came down to it, and it was good for the state to get rid of me, they would do that. You can go back and look in, 2012, when an American citizen was drone bombed in Yemen. They will get rid of you if it's good for them. So
yeah, if it's good for them and politically expedient and they think they can get away with it, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about it. And so I think it's important that we take this idea and see that trucking used to be seen as kind of like a rebellious kind of lifestyle. The truck drivers were, about freedom and kind of setting their own time and living by their own rules. And it's more and more today, the culture of truck driving is dependent on the government. And it's a complete reflection of what we see all throughout society. Why do you think that change has occurred? What do you think has happened? And is it a really big change, or did I just not notice it before the year 2012?
That's a hard question for me to answer, and let me explain why. Because, trucking culture in the United States is sort of its own animal. I mean, it has analogs in other countries and other places, but, because of the size, population, and various demographics throughout the United States, it's its own sort of thing here. And even though I've been around it and immersed in it, I've also, because I've spent all this time in other countries, I've been to Australia 4 times. I've been to New Zealand 3 times. I lived in New Zealand for a year and a half. I've probably spent 3 years of my life in Oz and then northern Canada. So, I mean, in that time where this cultural shift and perception you're talking about has changed, I haven't always been here to sort of witness it, like firsthand. I have been sort of kind of around the edges, so it's a difficult question for me to answer. I mean, maybe it has something to do with social media. Maybe it has something to do with, like, quote unquote, the sort of old guard of guys that were in the business in the 60s and 70s and 80s retiring. Also, I would venture to guess that it would have something to do with the sort of general corporatization of business itself, because many large businesses buy up smaller ones and just get bigger and bigger and bigger and push out the smaller competitors. And the trucking business is no different. There's like many mega carriers around, and they're not interested in the trucking culture. They're interested in getting loads moved by any means necessary and getting bums in seats by any means necessary. So you have all these factors which have kind of influenced trucking culture in the U.S., at least in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I remember when I started driving, I was that was back, it was still, I want to say that the schedule was still, and people probably aren't going to recognize this identity of a clock, but it was still the 12 and 16 clock, right? And it was a couple of years after I'd been driving that it changed to 11 and 14. But in the oil field in Texas, it's still 12 and 16. But if you cross the state line, then you're automatically on the federal 11 and 14. And it's just really odd. It's like, why? Number one, I don't understand the micromanaging in the kind of nanny state, everybody has to fit this exact same mold. And, and if you refuse to follow these ordained laws, then you're breaking the law in some way. And it's like, well, what if I could take a 5-hour break and be good to drive for 7 or 8 hours, when I'm 25, 26 years old, whereas when I'm 45 or 50 years old, maybe I'm a little bit more worn out and I need a little bit more rest. Why can't I pay attention to my own body and figure it out on my own? What I'm good at.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. And I mean, I believe the statistic is there's 3.5 million CDL holders in the United States. I think it's 1.8 million of them are active truckers, various long haul, short haul, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the idea that you take one framework, one set of rules to govern the bodies of 1.8 million different people operating in different industries, in different parts of the country, different climate conditions, different requirements. Everyone's got their own sleep schedules, their own health issues, and say everybody must do this. It's pretty asinine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like I said, it mirrors our culture. It mirrors society in such a way. And it's really hard to grasp what the idea of Americanism is, or being liberty minded, for liberty and justice for all, type deal. And you look around and you're like, these people don't give a shit about liberty at all. They don't give a fuck. None of them do. They all want to be kept safe and snug in their little warm, cozy, totalitarian state.
Yeah, we're in a very small minority, dude.
Yeah, no lie. Yeah, and it's disturbing too, because, all right, so the rhetoric that you hear, it's just so ridiculous. And you hear the rhetoric of conservatives. And I come from the conservative background. That was kind of I've said it before, I think, that I was kind of a conservatarian. I wasn't really familiar with people like Tom Woods, but I was a real big advocate of Andrew Napolitano. And I was listening to, Glenn Beck, back during the Tea Party movement. I kind of had an eye on Ron Paul, but I didn't really know enough about federal politics, national politics, to really follow him. And it wasn't until after, after the first year of Obama that I really started paying attention to the national scene. But I always kind of had the idea, and the one thing that always bothered me was consistency. It was people's lack of intellectual consistency and curiosity. It always bugged me. I always looked at it and I was always like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. That there's actually a very good argument against, this view. And so I never was a straight line conservative. I was always kind of leaning libertarian. I just didn't know what it was. And so now that I look back and I look at the way people that I used to discuss things with and I used to agree with on everything, I look back and I'm like, well, wait, you're being completely inconsistent in the fact that conservatism is in place in order to conserve the large centralized state no different than socialism is in place in order to conserve the large centralized state. And anybody who says that there's a difference between the two is either delusional or ignorant on the subject, and really should check out left and right the prospects for liberty, So, but that being
that
being said,
there's a saying that goes left wing, right wing, same bird.
Right. Well, what I was getting to was, where did you come from politically, and how do you look back upon how you used to view the world compared to how you view it now?
Wow, interesting question. I've been all over the place. I grew up, I guess as a kid, like in a mostly apolitical family. Like my dad and my mom were never really into politics.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle was always something of a conservative activist. My one uncle, Chris, he worked for the Reform Party, which got sort of subsumed into the Canadian Conservative Party, the modern one. Before they merged, he worked for the Reform guys. But my journey with politics and philosophy has kind of been all over the place. My one grandfather he's passed now, but he was a pretty dyed-in-the-wool socialist labor organizer. He was a steel worker, and he worked in the unions in Scotland before he immigrated to Canada. And he was always bringing home the newspapers, and he would get all three. There's like three main newspapers in Toronto: the Toronto Star, which is very left, the Toronto Sun, which is like sort of quasi-populist, quasi-conservatism, or at least that's what they pushed, and then the Globe and Mail, which would be like, I don't know, the Canadian equivalent of the New York Times, sort of center-left, kind of rightish, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I sort of grew up reading newspapers and books with my grandfather, but I never really I didn't really align myself with anything. And then when I started to become politically aware, I guess, around 2000 with Bush v. Gore. I started paying attention to that election, just kind of listening to talk radio in the U.S. when I was trucking, just because there was nothing else to listen to, and they hadn't invented iPods yet.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of like, well, how come it has to be these two guys, And so I sort of supported Ralph Nader, and I looked into what Ralph Nader was up to, and then I went down that rabbit hole and read Noam Chomsky, and I was, I wasn't like necessarily like ideologically trained hard leftist, but like I associated the left with being against war and, kind of being the nice guys. And at one point in my life, I even worked for the Green Party of Canada. I was a member of the Green Party. I worked for my local riding association. In Canada, we don't call them electoral districts; we call them ridings.
Oh.
So I was with the Greens, and then the whole Iraq War thing, like everybody else. I mean, I haven't watched much TV in my life, but for a little while there, I watched The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and I was completely against Bush and the war and the neocons. I mean, I still hold that position. I'm against neocons and war. And then Obama came along, and I got sucked up with Obama mania, and I thought, oh, great, finally, we're going to see the end of Bush and Cheney, and here's this African-American guy, and America's turning a corner, and everything's fucking rainbows and unicorns. And then, Obama gets into office, and he's like, well, we're not looking back. We're not going to bring Bush and Cheney to court, or Wolfowitz, or Rumsfeld, or any of these guys.
Clapper, yeah.
I'm like, okay, so, all right. And then, I started hearing about the drone attacks and like Obama bumping them up. And then I started digging. And then I started being like way more third party mindset, I guess. I was disillusioned with how the Obama phenomenon and the energy of everybody wanting to get rid of Bush and those guys had got subsumed into supporting more of the same with the Democrats and Obama. And then I was like, you know what, there's something not right here. And then I started reading more and more, like, about Ron Paul and the libertarian ideas, which I'd always sort of known about, kind of on the fringes, but I never really dove deep into it. And yeah, somewhere along the way with the drone bombings and all the stuff going on around the world that wasn't really getting spoken about enough in the media, and then, you know, having been in the trucking business and starting to connect the dots of the warfare state and then being at the shitty end of the stick with the government all the time, getting harassed by cops, getting assumed to be a rolling piggy bank on which you just, like, lay fines, and that's somehow supposed to make the roads safer, and, you know, getting treated like garbage by DOT people. And I just started making these connections that, you know what, the government's not our friend. It's never going to be. And I pay taxes, so these two groups of clowns who are basically the same, the Republicans and the Democrats, can maintain empire and kill people I've never met for no reason. So basically, yeah, since the Obama years, I've kind of gone off the deep end, and now I would consider myself somewhere in a triangle between being a voluntarist, a libertarian, and a burn it all to the ground anarchist. So I'm somewhere over there.
Yeah, you're exactly where I'm at. That's why I told some guy the other day, he listens to the show, so shout out. I don't have permission to use his name, but shout out. I told him the other day, I said, yeah, I'm not even really an ANCAP. And he goes, you could have fooled me. I agree with you on everything. And I'm like, yeah, well, I don't feel like, number one, I don't feel like I'm schooled to extensively enough in economics to make a succinct determination whether or not capitalism in the scale of things and in the long run, without the interventionism, without the cronyism, I'm not educated enough in that field to be able to tell you that it is by far the best system ever and will not be surpassed by some other system. So I don't claim to be knowledgeable in that in such a way that I can make that determination. Another reason I don't claim ANCAP is because it gives people that don't understand the ideology, that have never read Rothbard or Mises, and don't really understand where you're coming from a philosophical level, it gives them the idea that you want to force capitalism on them, so they automatically start relating you with like a Pinochet type, where you want to throw commies out of helicopters. And I think voluntarist works best, but most people look at you like you're retarded if you say that. So I just straight up tell people I'm an anarchist.
Yeah, well, this is the problem with labels, is that other people are going to have a different perception and understanding of what that label means. And if you wear a label loudly and proudly enough, you have to do a couple of things. A, you have to, in the eyes of others, you basically now own everything everybody ever says with that label.
Right.
And B, if they don't understand it, or they're not quite sure what you're about, you're constantly having to explain yourself. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with the discourse, but it gets tiresome after a while, you know. Like, and that's one of the reasons I quit Facebook. I was on Facebook for like 9 years, and I guess I was using it incorrectly as my own personal soapbox. But like, you got your family on there. I'd have random people I met at parties or Burning Man or on the road traveling, other truck drivers. I got this sort of like motley crew of people in my life who would like look at things I would say, and they'd be like, what kind of crack is Gord smoking today? Because it's not in their field of vision to think about that stuff, and they don't. And if they do, a lot of them think about it differently, or they have like an antagonism towards idea, because there's a problem out there in the zeitgeist that's bigger than you or us or any kind of liberty movement, is the sort of people associate corporatism with capitalism on the left, right? So if you say capitalist, they think that, you know, you're all about what the status quo we have is now, when we're not.
Right.
And then, you know, the people, a lot of people on the sort of hard right associate socialism with gulags and Stalin, and a lot of people on the left, that's not actually what they're advocating for. So you have this sort of disconnect between what people think others mean and what they're actually talking about. And sometimes that a lot of the time that's done on purpose because you want to you want to beat up on the other team and prove that you're right and they're wrong. So you build straw men out of what you think they're actually advocating. And I just got tired of like straw man erection and straw man burning and having to explain myself to all these people. So I quit Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's even hard in my own personal life because my wife and her family, all my in-laws are pretty dyed-in-the-wool progressives.
Right.
And that's fine. There's some things where we have crossover. We're all against the prison industrial complex and we're all against war. The really important things. The thing that they don't like about me is I hang it on their political party because the Democrats are all about the prison industrial complex and war while pretending to be against them.
Well, it's all progressivism. I mean, this all stems from the history of progressivism. This comes straight out of Woodrow Wilson's playbook. You could call yourself a progressive, but you're putting yourself right there in the mix with some of the worst war criminals in the history of the world.
Yes. So, I mean, insofar as we, as calling ourselves, voluntarists or libertarians or whatever, have an image problem, people that use the label progressive also have one because, like, what does that mean? Does that mean, Wilsonian, let's get on board with World War I so, like, we can, remake Europe and you put everybody to work and have this, like, unified collective new 20th century man, all that bullshit from back then? Or do you just want a $15 an hour minimum wage? Like, what do you mean by progressive?
Right. Well, and that's, and I mean, it goes in so many different ways too, because like, if you even mention like, okay, so like one of my biggest, and my mom and I were talking about this a few days ago, or probably a few weeks ago. I don't know. Time is just one of those things I don't keep up with very well. One of the things that I've always been about, and my mom was pointing out to me, like, you've been saying this for like 10 years. And it's like this, whatever system you want to live under will not succeed as a centralized point over 350 million people. I don't care if you want to live in a laissez-faire capitalist society. I don't care if you want to live in a socialist society. I don't give a fuck if you want to live in some kind of weird cronyist society. It doesn't matter to me. The problem is that this centralized government is forcing it on everybody who doesn't want to live in that society. That's the issue. The issue isn't what society you want to live in. The issue is you are forcing me to participate in it. That's the problem. So, like, I will tell somebody straight up that I think secession is a good idea. And yes, the states should go back to nullifying federal laws, which they did with marijuana, or they have been doing with marijuana, and more power to them. I think that's great. And Missouri, I don't know if you saw this, but I read an article a while back that Missouri actually they passed a bill a couple of months ago that said, hey, look, if the fucking federal government sends in federal agents into Missouri to prosecute our citizens based upon federal gun laws that we have dictated are unconstitutional to our state constitution, we are going to prosecute them as felons. And I'm like, fucking right, dude. Thank you. That's what the system was supposed to be.
Yeah, well, the problem is that people, like, they assume that they acted onto it, and it's like, no, the central idea of America, such as there is one, is separation of powers and, letting individuals try to do what they want. Now, obviously, right off the start, Washington and his whiskey tax and Jefferson starting the Marines and sending them to fight in Libya in 1803. Like, right off the get go, they were like immediate hypocrites and slavery. But the idea behind it, if there's something to that idea.
It was an ideology. It was like it was almost like you would say a utopian dream that they were trying to push forward this perfect ideal that they couldn't even live up to. It's kind of like you would think about a religion where you're like trying to live up to and pursue the greatness of a God. They were trying to pursue and live up to the greatness of liberty and freedom. And they all failed, but it doesn't mean that the idea wasn't good.
No, you have to, keep marching forward, so to speak. And, it's social evolution, much like biological evolution, is not over. It didn't, as Bill Hicks used to say, evolution didn't stop when we grew opposing thumbs. It's still happening. And that applies to social evolution as well.
I want my thumbs.
I want my thumbs. Yeah. Oh man. Just imagine if Bill Hicks was alive today. Hey?
What you reading for? Looks like we got ourselves a reader.
Guys, I was that guy sitting in the truck stop reading. I was Bill Hicks sitting at the Petro in Nebraska reading people looking at me funny because I was reading a book,
You should have seen me. I was at Costco the other day, right? And Costco, they won't unload your trailer if you're in the truck. They want you to come and sit inside. So I'm sitting in there reading Ordinary Men about the 101st Battalion in Nazi Germany that was sent into Poland to police the Polish Jews and execute them. I went through like 6 chapters sitting there, man. People were just looking at me like, what the fuck is this dude just sitting here? A complete oddity.
How come he's not on his iPad or on his phone,
Right. Well, if I am on my phone, typically I'm reading a book on Kindle. They just don't realize it.
Yeah.
So, but.
Yeah, what you reading for? Oh, boy.
Fucking Bill Hicks is one of the greatest comedians ever, man. I could sit here and talk Bill Hicks for hours.
Yeah, I remember.
You broke up, Bo.
Back before the widespread adoption of MP3s and digital downloads and whatnot, I had a whole bunch of Bill Hicks on CD. I used to just listen to that guy whiling away the hours going down the road.
Yeah, he's fucking great. I remember I want to say I was like 9 or 10 years old, something like that. And I was looking through my mom and dad's, case of tapes, and I found the fucking Sam Kinison, Have You Seen Me Lately? That was my first exposure to comedy, and I haven't been the same since.
Yeah, well, there's always truth in humor, and I mean, it's an ancient idea. That's why they had a court jester, because, everyone's prim and proper in the king's court, and there's certain protocols, and sometimes the truth is kept hidden to suit various purposes. And the court jester can make fun of the king and can make fun of everybody else in the court. And, comedians, that's part of the function they serve in society, is to just poke fun at and show the truth through humor, because that's the only way to deal with some of the harsh realities in life, is to just laugh at shit,
Right. That's no doubt.
I mean,
that's one of the first things I did. Actually, I think I mentioned this in a podcast when I was talking about Julian Assange. Well, one of the first things I did when they arrested Assange was I texted Scott Horton, and I was like, so, I guess Assange is Waco to, Trump-Russia collusion being Ruby Ridge, which is saying that since they failed so horribly to convict Trump of Russia collusion, they were looking for a victory by going after Assange. And, and Scott was like, yeah, I guess so. It looks that way. And I just laughed, and I was like, man, it's not funny, but I can't do anything but laugh. And he goes, you laugh because it's true. And I was like, that's exactly right. Like, it's just that fucked up, and it's that in your face, the way that the government operates.
Yeah, no, there's a line from a song by this obscure band from Canada back in the late 80s, early 90s. I can't remember the name of the song, but the band was called The Pursuit of Happyness. And the lyric goes, you gotta laugh to prevent yourself from crying.
I've recognized that lyric. I can't place where I know it from. So you're not alone there. So,
yeah.
I want to.
Yeah.
All right. What do you think? Do you think they're actually going to succeed? Like in this culture war, do you think comedy is going to be successfully shut down? I have a hard time believing that's ever going to happen. Like there's always been comedy.
There's always going to be comedy because in order for the culture warfare crowd on whatever side of that divide, such as it's probably more multifaceted than anybody gives it credit for.
Right.
In order to crush comedians, and in order to crush comedy, or in order to make certain subjects verboten, they have to crush part of the human soul individually and collectively, and they're never going to do that. People want to laugh. It's like people want to fuck, people want to have sex, they want relationships, they want food. They have all these desires and things you need to be, a whole human, and laughter is one of those things. So they're never going to succeed because there's always going to be people that laugh and make fun and make their friends laugh and enjoy mirth, and they can't crush that no matter how hard they want to try.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just I see certain things, man, and some of it seems so dystopian as it's happening, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if they're going to get away with this. I don't know if they're going to get away with this. I just don't see. It seems like there are so many people, and people are doing like what I'm doing, and they're out there talking, and they're putting out podcasts, they're doing YouTube channels, and they're fighting back, against these censors and this, that, and the other. I actually posted something on Facebook earlier about a guy. He was a rapper that has been convicted of terrorist threats for writing I don't know if he just did a cover of the old NWA song or if he actually wrote a new song called Fuck the Police. And he was arrested on terroristic threats, and I think it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld the decision that he was a true threat. And I guess now the case is going to move on to the United States Supreme Court, obviously. But I mean, I feel like these cases, a lot of cases in this way, thank you, baby, has moved up to the United States Supreme Court, but it always seems like it's defeated at that United States Supreme Court level. The problem is that you pushing it that far. You know what I'm saying? And even if it comes out that everything's going to end up being okay in the long run, and all of us out there making our voices heard and talking shit and saying, hey, y'all can't do this to us, it makes a difference. The fact that it's allowed to go through the legal system up to that level and it's not stopped before that is disturbing in my view.
Well, yeah, because what's going on is in the lower courts and sort of local authorities, so to speak, be it like, municipal, county, state level governments, tyrannies don't just exist in like a federal grand scale level. There's little mini tyrants everywhere. And, over time, sometimes they just get so high sniffing their own jenkum that they think that they can get away with that shit. And then it has to end up in the Supreme Court for the big guys to be like, no, actually, you can't do this. And there's little mini tyrants everywhere, and it's a constant battle, and it does suck that, these cases come up where, free speech gets impinged on, or, the media smears somebody or the legal system, the legal system fails in some way and some person gets caught in like a Kafkaesque sort of nightmare of everything going wrong, and it doesn't get solved until much later and much further up the legal system food chain. And I guess it means you have to be vigilant, and like you say, keep pushing and keep saying no, right? No, we're not putting up with this. No, you're not going to impede on our free speech. No, you can't criminalize this. And it sucks that has to be the way, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that's what bothers me the most is like, okay, so like, get back to what I was talking about earlier, and this kind of ties in with what we were just saying just now. So I just want to tie it all together as far as this point goes. So when I was more of a conservative type in my thinking, I always said that I was a constitutionalist, and I had read the first 10 amendments. I didn't really pay attention to anything after 10 because I was an originalist, and nothing after 10th Amendment matters. Which that we could the debate the merits of whatever amendment, but and that goes into the first 10 as well. But what I realized is that in my thinking, I was not adhering to the principles that I was saying that I was adhering to, right? And it was like a self-reflection, and it was very uncomfortable. It was almost like finding out my entire life was a lie, you know what I'm saying? Because I was like, hold up. Like, this is all fucking unconstitutional. You're telling me these wars that I was led to believe America was on the right side of, they were all unconstitutional. What was the shock and awe, theater I was all cheering on because I was fresh out of the military and I was all gung-ho and, kill Haji and, yada, yada, yada. And before anybody calls me a racist, no, that's what they call them when you're in basic training. That's what they call Muslims. They call them Haji. That's not my term. That is how the military refers to people of Islam. To Muslims, they call them Haji. So, but, you're supposed to be all gung ho and cheering this on. And then you're starting to look back, and this is what my search was for. It was like, well, I vote on principle. But then I was like, at one time I was like cheering on Ted Cruz, and I'm like, wait, how is this principled? And somebody actually pointed out to me, hey, look, I don't think he actually stands for what you think he stands for. And they were right. And I completely changed, my views on Cruz, but there's a difference in people that are willing to look at that and become uncomfortable in that process, and those that excuse it. And it seems like so many people are interested in excusing it. Is this something new, or is it a reflection of the education system, or is it just people are just stubborn and don't like that idea that they could have been wrong? Do you have any feel on this?
Well, I think it's old. I think it's always been with us, and it ebbs and flows. And there's a term that I picked up from this internet discussion board character I used to read sometimes, and he basically boiled it down to this: principles over principles, right? The principles, PLES, the principles you stand on, versus principles, the principal people, principal parties, principal groups, right? And
right.
So I'm a principles over principles guy, right? And most people aren't. Most people are interested in principles. They're interested in their tribe and their group. Yeah. And, and it's manifesting itself now with the Trumpelos, man. I'm ambivalent about Trump. He pissed off the right people, and he shook stuff up, and I guess that was useful to a point. But when you point out the defects of the man to his serious supporters, all of a sudden, oh, working with Saudi Arabia is okay. What about those Iranians? Like, hold on a minute. 15 of the 19 hijackers that crashed into the World Trade Center and caused 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government is the world's #1 financier and exporter of Wahhabist Sunni terrorism in the fucking planet, and they're Trump's buddies. Well, you know, it's better to be on their side, you know, because they're holding it down in the Middle East. And what would you do if you weren't friends with them? Like, the dissembling and lack of principle on display by Trump supporters with regards to foreign policy in the Middle East it's fucking mind-numbing to watch it. You know what I'm saying? And,
just be fucking honest with me. You know, tell me that you know what? Saudis are the only major country in the Middle East that are friendly with Israel. And my goal is not to make America great. My goal is to make Israel great and to be a puppet of fucking Israel. Just tell me this. Don't be fucking bullshitting me.
Yeah, and and like I say, that's my most recent example of seeing, you know, the tribe overruling a principle, or, you know, and like I say, it's been around forever. You know, all the previous presidents would say one thing and do something else, and then their supporters kind of have to be, well, you know, they have to rationalize away principles they pretend to adhere to, you know, like all the Obama people had to, like, rationalize away the drone bombings and rationalize away the fact that Afghanistan was still being occupied, and, you know, we're still involved in Iraq, and
the bankers in his cabinet
all the way down. Yeah. Or the fact, you know, like the Clinton people, the people that supported Hillary Clinton, they have to rationalize the Goldman Sachs speeches and the fact that the Democrats get financed to the hilt by all the people on Wall Street they claim to hate, you know? It's just, it's rationalizations all the way down, rather than standing on principle and saying, you know what, I'm not supporting these people, and I'm not taking part in this Democratic shit show until I get some people that do have principles. And then you end up being us not voting. You know, like.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, you saw that tweet I posted. I think you saw the tweet I posted yesterday where I said this just in: Mike Pompeo and John Bolton will be leading the "Drain the Swamp" chant at the next Trump rally. My whole point is, like, when did draining the swamp become recycling the George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush administrations? You know.
Yeah, no, it was never about, it was an old friend of mine back in Canada who was in the military, and he actually fled so he didn't get sent back to Iraq. Interesting fellow. When the whole drain the swamp rhetoric came around with Trump's campaign, he's like, Trump's not going to drain the swamp. He's just going to drain it of Democrats and replace it with Republicans. There's no drainage going on.
Right.
You know? And he was right. There has been zero drainage.
Yeah, he did one thing. He signed an executive order at the beginning of his administration, which I thought was pretty interesting and I actually liked. And the executive order was that it was something along the lines that if you become a lobbyist within the government and you become a lobbyist, then you're unable to apply for a job within government for up to 5 years after your lobbying has ended, which I thought was interesting, but I don't know if anything ever came of that or if it's ever going to be enforced like so many other executive orders that may look decent. And I have my problem with executive orders. I don't think we have to get into the weeds of the philosophy of that, but that was an interesting one, but that was like within his first month. And I really believe that a lot of people just stopped paying attention to what his actual, like, deeds were on things after about 3 or 4 months. And I don't think that's unique with Trump. I think that's what happens. You have the new car smell, and you're like really loving it and paying attention. So the presidents are going to come in, and in that first 100 days, they're going to do everything they can to make sure they keep their promises. But as soon as that 100-day new car smell is over with, that's when the real meat and potatoes starts. That's when the real tyranny begins.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a protocol and it's a stamp, like you're making auto parts. There's the first 100 days, then there's the next round of congressional elections, and it's all cyclical. Just bang,
Mm.
bang, bang, and it repeats itself. So, yeah, Trump might have done some interesting stuff at the beginning. He obviously riled up some feathers, and that probably needed to be riled up. But as the administration moves on, it's same old, same old. Like you say, the United States government seems fairly beholden to interests of the state of Israel and the House of Saud.
Yeah.
The fucking Trump is selling major weapon systems to the Saudis and nuclear technology.
Yep.
That's probably not a good idea. I told you about a book. I sent you a message about.
Oh,
this
yeah, you
book
did.
Called The Siege of Mecca. And if anybody's listening to this, anybody out there, go get this book. It's by a guy named Yaroslav Trofimov. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
He sounds like a Russian agent.
Maybe he is. I think he's on Twitter. I think I followed him on Twitter. But he wrote this book called The Siege of Mecca, and it's a very fast moving book. It almost reads like an action suspense thriller, but it's actually a historical account of this incident which took place in Saudi Arabia in 1979 that almost everybody in the world ignored because it was being overshadowed by the Iranian hostage crisis in Tehran during the Carter administration. So basically, while the Iranian Revolution takes place in 1978-79, they occupy the American embassy. They take a bunch of prisoners. The whole world is watching that. Jimmy Carter's losing his mind. Like, this is a major, major problem. And at that exact same time this is happening, this Juleman was his name, this really radical Wahhabi Sunni religious nut job, and a bunch of his followers go to the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the holiest shrine in all of Islam, right? Like ground zero for the world's largest religion.
Yeah.
And they take it over. They occupy it. They sneak weapons in. So we're talking like 400 or 500 guys go in there, take the place over, and basically like lay siege to it and kick out all the Saudi government people. They take all these people hostage and make all these demands of the Saudi government. They're telling the House of Saud, listen here, motherfuckers, you guys are too westernized. You're having all these kafirs in our lands. You're too cozy with the Americans. You're defiling the lands of Islam, like what is now, the Arabian Peninsula, and you're going to stop doing that, or we're going to kill everybody here, right? And this and this guy who is like this Juleman's cousin or relative was like supposed to be like the second coming of Muhammad, or like there's a part of Islam that tells of like a new prophet coming back, and so he was claiming that his cousin was the new prophet, and that's it. We're doing things our way now. And the House of Saud shit itself. They tried to go in there and take the place back over, and this Juleman and his guys, they had snipers in all the minarets, and like they were basically kicking the House of Saud's army's ass. They couldn't get in there and get rid of these guys, and for several weeks, the House of Saud is trying to deal with this. And they're also having riots in the eastern part of the country where all the oil wells are, which is the Shia part of Saudi Arabia. And all these Shia oil field workers were going on strike, and they were like expressing sympathy for the Iranian Revolution. So like the House of Saud is like losing control of their country, and nobody noticed, right? So the House of Saud actually got French commandos. The president of France used his own personal Learjet to send these guys from like, what's the name of the? I can't remember the name of the French special forces, the IGN or something like that.
These commandos get flown to Riyadh. They go to Mecca. They're not actually supposed to go into the mosque because, like, you know, non-Muslims are barred, and they train these guys, and then there's like Pakistani commandos, special forces that get flown in, and they go in, and they finally get a hold of this Juliman guy. Like 80 or 90 of the conspirators that took over the Grand Mosque were beheaded, and, you know, they figured it out. But in this book, Trofimov draws all the connections between the House of Saud and the sort of radical Wahhabists that actually keep a lid on Saudi society, and there's connections to Bin Laden. You know, the Bin Laden family's tied up in this, and you know, in this book, he basically illustrates this long time and ongoing connection between the House of Saud, who want to maintain their relationship with the United States and keep oil money flowing and, you know, live their lavish lifestyles, and the fact that many people in Saudi Arabia are basically religious fucking lunatics and disapprove of things that the House of Saud does. You know, for as much as Americans like us want nothing to do with the House of Saud, people in Saudi Arabia want nothing to do with the United States or the West in general. And this tension in Saudi Arabia is a serious problem, and it's never really been addressed, right? The House of Saud tries to keep a lid on it, but in order to keep a lid on it, they have to, like, pay off all these Wahhabi clerics and give them money and give them, like, latitude to operate within Saudi Arabia as they see fit. And so now all these Wahhabist whack jobs send their money overseas to build mosques around the world and spread their own version of Islam, which then manifests itself as all these foreigners showing up in ISIS, all these people from London and Canada and Australia and Greece. And, like, why are all these people traveling to go fight with ISIS in Iraq and Syria? Well, it's because the Wahhabis are sending money all the way around the world trying to, like, franchise their version of Islam, and it's being allowed to happen by the House of Saud.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And who are the House of Saud's best friends? Donald Trump, Mike fucking Pompeo, right? And, like, this has been going on for years, and it gets it. And what we get is Rachel Maddow and MSNBC going, Russia, Russia, Russia. No, I'm sorry, you know, Vladimir Putin's not a nice guy. You know, the Russian state is what it is, but they're not causing problems around the world the way that the House of Saud is. And, like, if you want to get an understanding of the recent history of that, you've got to read this book, The Siege of Mecca. And there's I'll say one more thing from the book, and then I'll stop talking about it. There's a quote in it that illustrates how wrong that the government gets things and their advisors get things. I'm sure many people in your audience will know the name Zbigniew Brzezinski.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's the guy who wrote the Grand Chessboard. He's been, like, Paul Wonk guy in the deep state in the United States government for a long time, and he was Carter's foreign policy advisor. He was the dude. And before all this happened, early in Jimmy Carter's administration, Brzezinski,
hey, buddy,
the eggheads, and
hey, repeat that last sentence. You're breaking up just a little bit. Can you repeat that last part?
About the Siege of Mecca, this book, is there's a passage early on in it where Trofimov is discussing a meeting that took place in the White House. Jimmy Carter's there, much of his staff, and this guy, foreign policy advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski. And Brzezinski states to Carter and everybody else there that they do not have to worry about any rise in Islamic nationalism in the Middle East or anywhere else. I don't have the quote in front of me to give you the actual quote, but that's the gist of it. And I think that humongous error, that critical mistake Brzezinski's perception of the situation is a good example we can use to illustrate how, like, the people who claim to be in charge of this crazy shit going on Earth right now, especially in the governments, and, you know, these foreign policy guys who are really the ones in charge in Washington. Mm-hmm. You know, these are the guys that run the empire. You know, they don't always have the answers. They're not always right. In fact, a lot of the times they're wrong, and we witness this again and again and again. And, you know, we keep being told to vote as if the choice between the left wing or the right wing of the war party is going to make any difference, as if it's going to dislodge these people from their positions within the government and their hands on the levers of power. And, yeah, it's just amazing to me that people still believe in this.
Well, here's my thing. And I kind of like, I think Scott Horton has said something similar to this. But the more I pay attention to the U.S. foreign policy, the way they operate, and especially Brzezinski, the way he was, and Kissinger too, the way that they operate is they operate from a position of ignorance and extreme hubris. And that's what our foreign policy is. It's ignorance and extreme hubris. They believe they don't need to have all the nuances and details involved. That the American empire is the largest, strongest, most dominant empire ever in the history of the world, and no one's ever going to stop us. And that's what they believe. And so it doesn't matter, like, if you point out, well, this is wrong. Yeah, well, we're doing this for American, you know, what do they call it? The interest. That's what they call it. American interest. This is in American interest. Yeah, well, it's not our country. What's in that country's interest? What's in their citizens' interest? What the fuck does that have to do with us? You know? But they have this really insane mindset that it's their world, and they're going to shape it, and it's malleable, and people are malleable, and they're going to shape opinion and humanity to their image, or to the image they want it to be the slaves or servants of their interests. And it doesn't matter what's good for the people. It only matters what's good for them. And it's just insanity as far as I'm concerned. But that is a perfect way to move right into the presidential candidates, which is what I wanted to get with you on. I think that you'll have some interesting takes. And so Tulsi Gabbard is making waves as far as like talking bad and getting in, basically like she's getting into the faces of the military industrial complex. She's challenging the ignorance and the hubris of foreign policy. So what do you make? You saw me post earlier that just read some Hayek or something, man. Just get your economics right, and like you'll have all kinds of people backing you. I think that, do you think they're going to be successful in shutting her down, or I kind of think that she's going to be the left's version of Ron Paul, where she's going to change a lot of hearts and minds over a period of time, but I don't think she'll ever be the president.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen what the system does to people who, you know, question the maintenance of empire. And, you know, and Gabbard's in a unique position, having served in the military, you know, and she's seen firsthand what empire does and what it's costing us. And I take my hat off to her for focusing on that, and she's kind of made that the locus of her campaign. Because if you look at the rest of the Democratic field, you know, they're all fighting each other over who can commie harder, you know, who can dictate more control of the economy, who can impose more of the progressive vision on society. They're all in it, and she's not doing that as much, although I understand her economic positions. Like you say, she should read some Hayek. She's probably like the Sandinista a bit, you know, sort of Bernie Sanders economic and domestic policy stuff and whatever, that's fine. But the fact that she's saying enough's enough with the empire and let's contract that and spend less money means that the DNC are going to drown her candidacy in the crib. Like, they're not, she's not going to get anywhere. You know, this is the exact same thing that happened to Ron Paul. You know, there's a real famous clip that the Daily Show played when Ron Paul was in Iowa, and like, you know, in the early straw polls, he came in third, and like Fox News like talked about the first place person, the second place person, and the fourth place person, and they just skipped over Ron Paul. Like, they pretended he didn't even exist. And you know, the Democratic media are doing the same thing to Gabbard now. They're giving her very short shrift when they do talk about her. You know, like this fucking idiot Barry Weiss calling her a toady to Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah.
And, you know, these MSNBC people who basically treat her like garbage, or they try and bring up the fact that, like, you know, she had a Hindu conservative upbringing and she had the wrong opinion about gay marriage back. They're going to do anything they can to smear her in the minds of the voter, and it's not because of the things they're actually smearing her about. It's because she's anti-war, and she's a threat to the foreign policy establishment. And that was the same thing with Ron Paul. They tried to hang him on, you know, he's got retrograde views about abortion, or, you know, he's Dr. No and he never votes for anything in the government, and he's a weirdo that wants everybody to turn into a heroin junkie and legalize all drugs. But they won't actually attack you on the thing that's most important to them, because then that reveals it, right?
Yeah.
MSNBC is never going to attack Tulsi Gabbard for being anti-war, because then it reveals that's what they're actually about. They're pro-war. They're pro-foreign policy establishment running the show.
I don't know,
right?
man. So, look at how S.E. Cupp and all the panelists on her show would go after Dave Smith when he would just be like, yeah, we got to stop this bullshit in Yemen. And they would just go after him. Oh, so what are you trying to say? What should we do? And he's like, nothing. It's none of our fucking business. We need to stay the fuck out of it. Like, kids are dying of cholera. Like, I think Scott Horton's the one who pointed out, yeah, this is something that can be cured with fucking Gatorade. You know, like shit.
Yeah.
You
well,
know?
This is it. But I mean, I haven't seen that specific clip, but the assumption underneath it is the assumption of all of these people in the media and the foreign policy establishment defenders is that we're supposed to do something, right? That's their question. Well, what do you suggest we do?
Right.
Well, that implies that we are actually supposed to do something.
Exactly.
Like, as if America's not involved in every problem around the world, that somehow that's a bad thing.
Right.
Well, no. Problems are going to be problems. There's lots of things that the American government doesn't stick its nose into, and there's lots of things that it does stick its nose into. And if we examine the hows and the whys of what the selection process is for that, then we can sort of understand what their priorities actually are. But, like, the main point is they assume that Team America World Police will always be, and that we always have to be involved. And to bring it back to, like, the individual voter, and like you're saying about being compelled to take part in this, you know, they don't have conscription anymore. They just conscript your money for other people to go do it, right?
Yeah.
So your taxes get taken from you at gunpoint, and then it's used for war. It's used for the foreign policy establishment to play Team America World Police, and you have no choice. Oh, well, if you don't like it, you can just go vote for somebody. Well, yeah, you can vote for whoever you want, but then the foreign policy people and their bootlickers in the media kill the candidacy of that person, and then we get Obama or Trump or Clinton or Bush or whoever that just do what they're told.
Yeah,
you brought up further the empire.
Exactly, and you brought up Ron Paul, or you brought up the Daily Show talking about Ron Paul. The best line that Jon Stewart had in that whole fucking take was, when did Ron Paul become the 13th floor of a hotel?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
That was fucking great. And then you brought up Barry Weiss.
Yep.
and calling Tulsi Gabbard a toady. Did you see that clip? She was like, I think I'm using that word right. They actually had to look it up. Like Joe Rogan had to get Jamie to look it up to make sure that she was even using the word right. It's like, you're like, she's like the editorial director of the fucking opinion, section of the New York Times or some shit. Like, what the fuck are you doing in that position? Like, you don't even know how to use language?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, the New York Times, like, let's not even get started about the quality level of people that work there or of the narratives they push. I don't want to derail. I could go on at length, but to your point about Tulsi Gabbard, yeah, I mean, I think she's saying all the right things about foreign policy stuff. The rest of her platform, it'll probably be stock standard 2019 democratic economics, which I probably disagree with. But, Thad Russell has made a very good point about domestic policy. He's writing a book right now about the history of American empire and how the creation and maintenance of that empire was baked into the cake before the founders even got together and started America. Like, they were talking about this in the 1750s, so like, in his upcoming book, one of the points he's going to make, and one of the points he has made, is that when you live in an empire, foreign policy is domestic policy, and domestic policy is foreign policy. They're intertwined. They influence each other and dictate to each other, because, when you've got 800 military bases around the world and you're almost in every single country, and you've got multiple wars that haven't been approved by Congress on many fronts. And like, there was this thing that got released the other day about the 36 different operations the U.S. military is engaged in Africa right now. When that's the dominant thing you're spending your money on as a country, and that's the project which dictates what the government's doing, then everything else you're doing at home is tied into that, because now you're not spending money at home. Like, we have this opioid crisis. That's directly connected to the occupation of Afghanistan, because basically U.S. military is tending to opium fields, to poppy fields, I should say. All of this stuff is interconnected. So, like, maybe Tulsi Gabbard's domestic policy might suck, but the most important thing is her foreign policy, because all of those things are connected. Yeah. So, like, if she is going to advocate reducing the footprint of empire, spending less money on that empire, being involved in less wars, actually getting Congress to do its goddamn job and declare wars, and if there's no declared war, then nothing happens with the military as it's supposed to be. If that's her number one policy goal, then so be it. The rest of the stuff is just details, because it's all interconnected anyways. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's something I've actually wrestled with, in my own mind is, okay, like, let's say I put aside my principle as far as the domestic side goes, and I say, you know what, war is such an important issue, and the interventionism is such an important issue, and it's the number one reason that our society is enslaved to the point that it is. I mean, we're talking like the Patriot Act and all these different AUMFs and all this shit that have been signed into law. And let's say I just focus on that, and I say, okay, I'm gonna allow the domestic policy to slip by, and hopefully we can curb that, at least on a state level. And I go and I vote in the primaries for Gabbard. You don't have to be a registered Democrat or Republican here in Texas. You just have to be registered to vote. So I go and I do vote in the primaries, and I vote for Tulsi Gabbard. And let's say by some stretch of the imagination that every libertarian and anarchist decides to do the same thing, and that enough people are tired and fed up with these wars. I read an article the other day about how the families of the military members are becoming more and more anti-war by the day, which I don't blame them. So let's say that everybody says, you know what, Trump abandoned us on this one main key issue, and we're going to abandon him, and we're going to turn to Gabbard. And so she does become the nominee and eventually becomes the president. This is like serious speculation here. I'm not even saying that this could happen. But what would it mean to liberty in the future? And that's what I've been mulling over for weeks now. Like, if this were actually to happen and Medicare for all were to be ushered in, which I don't even know if it would be ushered in. I think that would be stopped. I think a lot of these socialist programs would be stopped by the Congress, no matter who, even if it was Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, any of these people that were elected as president. So I think a lot of these things that I don't like would be stopped, but it'd be stopped for the wrong reasons. It'd be stopped to continue to enrich and empower corporations and corporate donors. It wouldn't be stopped in order to spread liberty. So it's not like we're in the perfect domestic situation at the moment. So maybe we can better the foreign policy situation. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't see that.
No, and you're right. I mean, I wouldn't blame you. I mean, there's enough holier than thou doctrinaire, libertarian anarchist shit posters who are like, oh my God, don't vote. And I get it, I get it. And you have to wear two hats. You have to wear your sort of, your principle hat and your philosophy hat, and then you have to wear a hat that's what is the present reality right in front of us.
Exactly.
And the present reality right in front of us is that we've got an empire problem, and it ain't going away anytime soon. And that empire is going to sink us financially, economically, and, it's just going to keep producing more terrorists. More drone bombings going on around the world ain't making us any more friends. And arming the Saudis to the hilt isn't going to correct anything. So, if we have to, take the incrementalist, pragmatic route to libertopia someday way off in the future, and our choices in 2020 are, vote for Tulsi Gabbard because she's the only anti-war candidate on the crew. Well, all right. How does that hurt anything?
Right.
I mean, whatever. I can't even vote. I'm Canadian. I'm only here on a permanent resident. I got a green card.
Yeah.
I can't vote. And I think the laws. I live in New York State now. I don't think New York
you can
State
vote there. You're an immigrant. You can vote there.
According to some of the loonier fringe elements, yeah, I'm totally allowed to vote and sign up for food stamps and have everything paid for me.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm down at the welfare office, fucking balling, man. I'm getting that money, and I'm going and I'm getting jacked on heroin every weekend. It's great. I'm a parasite on the American body politic, and I'm gonna usher in the brown communist scourge next week. It's coming because of me.
Yeah.
That was sarcasm disclaimer for those of you who actually think I was being serious.
Yeah. Well, if they think you were serious, fuck them anyway. So who cares? I don't give a shit. So, all right. So here's another thing, and I think that libertarians, I disagree completely with the two-party system. I think it's a fucking joke, right? I'm like, I go to the store, I can choose from 5 different brands of bread. But in the most important decision, as far as government's concerned, they tell us all the time, it's the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. This is the most important election of our lifetime. We hear it all the time, but you get 2 choices. It's fucking retarded, right?
Yeah, and those 2 choices of the same thing have got their own internal systems to make sure that the choice you make doesn't actually
you make the right choice.
Like it's got its own self-defense mechanisms that are nearly impenetrable.
You better make the right choice. That's all there is to it. But what I'm saying is, I think like you just said a while ago, You take your principle or your philosophy hat in one arena, and you have your practical hat in the other. And as much as I'd like to say, I think this is where a lot of libertarians miss the boat. That if they want to make change, that they're sticking to principle. And this is not an insult to any libertarian at all, because because philosophically they have it right. You know what I'm saying? They're like they're at least aiming at the right target. You know, they may not like have everything fucking figured out, but they're at least aiming at the right target. So a couple of days ago, I don't know if you heard this or not, Scott Horton had talked about it on his show, and Tom Woods had talked to interview Jacob Hornberger and brought up the idea that Jacob Hornberger is actually floating the idea of possibly running for president under the Libertarian Party. I love Jacob Hornberger, like straight up. I think the dude is just one. He's like, he could be the next Ron Paul. I mean, he's run the Future of Freedom Foundation since the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. He does videos and podcasts weekly, and he did this whole long series on the assassination of JFK, which was really interesting. I want to say it was like something like 30 videos, 28 or 30 videos. It was really interesting. So I have nothing but respect for Jacob Hornberger. He knows he's like Ron Paul. He knows foreign policy. He knows the economics. And he's thinking about the idea of getting in to the race as a libertarian. My thing is, but this goes two ways too. So this is why I say I've been like wrestling with these issues over the last few weeks. My thing is, the Libertarian Party was never going to gain traction. It's not. They're not going to allow it to happen. The mainstream media, the two corporate parties are not going to allow the Libertarian Party to advance. No more than they're going to allow the Green Party to advance, or a Communist Party, or a Socialist Party, or yada, yada, yada. It's just not going to happen, right? So then I'm thinking, okay, so maybe instead of getting excited about the possibility of Jacob Hornberger running for president, which if he can get on a national scale, I think he'll have the same kind of impact as Ron Paul. Don't get me wrong. I think he'll change a lot of hearts and minds in the process and in the long run. But they're not going to let him win. And if it looks like he's going to win, they're going to kill him. All right, number two. So that brings me to, okay, so should I, primary for Tulsi Gabbard? Well, they're not going to let her win either. It's not going to happen. She's not going to win. They're not even going to let her they're going to try to keep her as fucking quiet as they can. They even put in new rules after she announced, they put in new rules to reach or exceed that in order to make it into the debates. And she had to go around. I heard her on Michael Tracy's podcast. She's been on a few other podcasts. She had to go around and fucking announce that they had made these new rules, that she had to get so many significant donors or specific. I can't even remember exactly what it was. I'd have to go back and listen. But they were changing the rules on her already. All right. So, and let's just say she does win it looks like she's going to win the primary. I have some advice for Tulsi Gabbard. And this is something that Daniel McAdams had admitted that Ron Paul's campaign was thinking about in 2008 and 2012. If it looks like you're going to win, do not fly. They will kill you. They're going to kill you. Like straight up. If you get that far, they're going to try to kill you. So don't fly. But you have to weigh all these things, and you have to realize, you have to understand, these people aren't going to give up their power willingly. Look what they did to Donald Trump. And no matter, I have my own opinion. This is like way off in the weeds. I think Donald Trump was a psyop. I think he's been handled by the fucking intelligence agencies since day one. And that's my belief. And I can get into that at some other fucking future time. But that's what I think. I don't have any proof of it, but I'm looking at it. I'm like, a lot of this shit don't make any sense. But anyway, so I don't think they're not going to let her win. Okay. So it's almost like, okay, why not stand on principle and just do what I'm going to do for principle, because they're not going to let anybody I want to win anyway. You know what I'm saying? So it's one of those fucking conundrums that people like me with the liberty mindset are in, especially people that are anti-war and want to see these fucking wars end.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just proves that you're thinking. If you end up in a catch-22 and you're having to, like, weigh principles and options and think deeply about something, I mean, that's better than just kind of, like, doing whatever Fox or MSNBC tell you, so good for you. I mean, don't let it become, like, an existential crisis or anything, but do what you got to do, man.
No, but it's something worth thinking about and worth mulling over and trying to figure out, okay, like, could I actually make a difference? And if I could, is it worth, putting my principles on hold to do this? Will I regret that in the long run,
Oh, no. I mean, in one way you're setting aside principle, but in the other you're actually pursuing it because one of the main objectives derived of your principle is like ending war and having a more peaceful society.
Right.
And if that means that you have to support a politician that you would normally not do anything like that. But I mean, at least if they're trying, there's some symbolism and value in that and just doing that itself. So like, don't feel bad about it.
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. It's just something that I think about. All right. Well, I want to touch on some of these other candidates, man. We spent we only spent 20 minutes on Tulsi Gabbard, I guess. Like, huh.
It's going to be like an it's going to be like an epic long podcast and a testament to the fact you put two truck drivers in a room together, and man, oh man, they're still talking the next day. I mean, if I was at your place in Texas right now and we had a couple of cases of beer, we'd still be at it tomorrow at 4 a.m.
That ain't no shit. My wife would still be going crazy. So, now she's sitting right outside the window looking at me like, oh, I heard my name. What? So she hates all this politics talk. She loves to have this podcast so she doesn't have to talk to me about this shit.
No, and this is good. I feel, I said this to some dudes a few weeks ago. I went to this Thad Russell thing down in D.C., and we all kind of agreed that, like, when you've got like a sort of weirdo outsider philosophical take and you sort of don't look at things the way 95, 98, 99% of the way the population does, and you don't have anybody to talk to about it, it's really good to make these connections, even if they're with like other weirdos who have no other connection to your life, who live far away, because like, my day-to-day life in Ithaca, I can't really talk to anybody about this at all.
Right.
Because it's just not, they just look at it differently, or it ends up devolving into an argument about something, or like my in-laws gang up on me because they attach all this other stuff to the, like, the term libertarian, and then, try and beat me up on other stuff. And it's good for the soul to be able to discuss things with a fellow philosophical traveler, and I appreciate the opportunity, man. I really do.
Oh, yeah, no doubt, man. Well, and it's also like, I mean, and it's good to be in those conversations with people that don't agree with you. I mean, honestly, like on Facebook, there's a guy that's come on my show a couple of times, Jason Corbel, and I think we've admitted in shows that we don't necessarily agree on everything. And he's really smart when it comes to history and the Constitution and American history, and and I have a lot of respect for him, but yeah, we don't agree on everything, and we get into it, not like name calling or anything, but we get into like the philosophies behind why we believe what we believe. And we disagree on a lot of things, and, but it's fun, and iron sharpens iron, man. And if you can do it, like my dad and I will debate, and, if you can do it with good spirit and, not come across like, come out of it where you're hating each other, then it's not bad. But I mean, if you can't, not you per se, but if the conversation can't be had without one party coming out of it, completely disillusioned and hating the other person, then it's not worth having that discussion or that debate. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But, what do you think about these other candidates?
I try not to think about them very much because it's amazing. They're well, a lot of them are recycled. Elizabeth Warren's been in the news for years in a couple of election cycles. Same with Bernie Sanders. Same with Joe Biden. Like, these people.
Well, yeah, they're known quantities.
They're dinosaurs, and they're known quantities, and none of them are saying anything new or insightful. There's nothing exciting. There's nothing in any of their policies that's going to, like, move the needle on anything I care about. So I give them none of my time. And, like, I can't be bothered with, like, the sort of Democratic Party media circle jerk all going off about, well, Pete Buttigieg is only a mayor of a small town, and maybe he doesn't have the chops to be president, and, touchy Uncle Joe hasn't, like, benefited from the Me Too movement, or, like, whatever. I don't care. Are any of you people anti-war? Are any of you gonna, like, knock it off with, like, drone attacks? Are any of you gonna, like, vest more power back into Congress and away from the executive? Are any of you going to stop any of this? And the answer from all of them is no. So I don't pay any of them any attention. And I mean, like I said, I don't even pay attention to half of what Tulsi Gabbard has to say, because she's already told me the one thing I want to hear.
Right.
So no, I'm not. My life is short. Time is a very valuable resource, and I give none of it to any of them, because they've already made it clear that none of them are interesting or are going to do anything good.
Okay.
So I have nothing to say.
Yeah. So you're in the same judge situation I'm in about judging these people. In like, just before you just said his name, I didn't know how to say that booted judge thing. I thought it was booty gig. I was like, this is like the weirdest name. I thought it was German or something. I don't know. But so I didn't.
I think I heard somewhere that his family background is like Maltese.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I heard that wrong. I could be completely wrong, but whatever. I don't care about his last name.
Yeah, no, I just didn't even know how to say it. That's all I was saying. Well, I have no idea what his policies are. I've yet to hear anybody come out and say anything anti-war. And another place that Tulsi Gabbard like stood out is she actually came out in defense of Julian Assange as well. And it was like, well, Jesus. And nobody else was saying anything. And you hear, like, I'll watch, every once in a while, I'll check out like the Jimmy Dore show or, something like that. Some of these progressives, the progressive soapbox or whatever, just to see what they're talking about. If they're talking about a topic I'm interested in. And, I know Jimmy Dore especially has been really like, he was feeling the burn big time in 2016. And now he's like, what the fuck is your goddamn problem, Bernie? You won't come out in favor of Julian Assange? You won't come out and defend Julian Assange? Who the fuck are you? You sold us out whenever you fucking, were on the Clinton bandwagon and supporting her. And now you're selling us out again by fucking, not even coming out and defending journalism. And it seems to me like Bernie is losing a lot of his hardcore supporters. Just because he refuses to be principled on some of these things. And, that's interesting to me.
Sanders might actually be the only guy I'll pay any attention to in the Democratic field, and I'll let you know why. Mostly because my in-laws are all Sanders people. And, dumb little factoid, in the 2016, presidential race, Sanders' number 2 fundraising zip code was 14850, Ithaca, New York, right where I live.
Oh.
So this is Sanders country. Every other car here's got a Bernie bumper sticker. So, like, Sanders is in my face every day. So, yeah.
I've never gotten into the bumper sticker thing. I don't really understand that. I remember driving around in 2017 seeing all these Bernie Sanders bumper stickers, thinking, Jesus, if he doesn't run again, then what are y'all going to do by 2020? Are you just going to cover it with something else, or you going to sell the car?
Yeah, I want to get the giant meteor 2020, end it all.
Put us out of our fucking misery.
I only have one. Yeah, I only have one bumper sticker on my pickup at the moment, and it's actually a custom-made decal, and it's a Trailer Park Boys reference. Did you ever watch the Trailer Park Boys?
No, I didn't.
All right, so it's this like little independent TV show thing that happened in Canada for a few years, and they became kind of like YouTube sensations around the world back in the aughts. So I think they started the show in '01, and they got really popular in like 2003, 2004, and they're this big thing in Canada. And one of the characters in the show has a father who's like a sort of not a central character, but like a part-time character on the show who has this saying. It's called "Way of the Road." That's like his answer to everything. He's like a retired truck driver. He's off on disability, but it's a fake disability. He's like milking the system, and he lives in the trailer park with his son. There's a few, and anytime there's like an issue or a problem, he just says, "Oh, it's the way of the road, bubs. It's the way of the road." So me and another truck driver friend of mine in Canada were real big fans, and he had these custom-built stickers, and it says "Way of the Road," which kind of goes along with the fact you're in a car, right? It's the way of the road. So to me, it's like, and I've appropriated this Trailer Park Boys thing to be like my own personal philosophy. It's just the way of the road, you know. Be nice to other people. Cooperate with other traffic. Don't drive like a maniac.
Right.
Keep your eyes open. Right?
Yeah.
Keep your eyes open. It's a way of the road to keep your eyes open. So to me, that's just it's like everything about my philosophy and my life boiled into one pithy saying: "Way of the road," and that's the only bumper sticker I have.
That's cool. I saw
maybe that would be a good way to end off. I think I got to like get back to my wife and my kid here eventually.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to edit this and get with my wife too. So yeah, we can cut it right there, man. We got a good at least an hour and a half. You know, probably. I think Scott Horton still got my record for the longest. I think we did a 2 hour and 20-minute podcast one day after we had talked for like 4 hours that day. So.
I'm not ever gonna try and compete with Scott Horton, man. That guy's long
dude. There is nothing like getting on the phone with Scott Horton, man, and you just mentioning a topic, and he'll go off he'll be talking about that topic for 2 hours, like easily, and he can tell you everything about it, especially if it's Middle East related, like foreign policy related. He is it's an encyclopedia, man. I don't even think about what I'm going to talk to Scott Horton about. I go into the episode, I ask him one question, and I just work off of that. Like, that's it.
No, he's fantastic. He's fantastic, and so is his book on Afghanistan. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I'm ready for his new one to come out. I don't know. Did you hear that interview he did with Max Blumenthal the other day?
No.
Talking about Max Blumenthal's new book?
No, I haven't heard it. Should I?
I just got the book in. Hold on, man. I just got it in yesterday. Hold on one second. Had it sitting right here. It's called The Management of Savagery: How America's National Security State Fueled the Rise of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Donald Trump. And it looks fucking fantastic.
Man, I'm on it. I'm going to listen to that podcast. I'll find it, and I'm going to get my hands on this book or put it on my Kindle for sure.
Yeah, here in the last 3 weeks, he's done 2 episodes with Max Blumenthal. I think the last episode he talked about Chelsea Manning, if I'm not mistaken, and Julian Assange. But the episode before that, I want to say it was on the 15th or the 16th, something like that. And he did an episode with Max Blumenthal about his book. And it looks like, sounds like it's going to be great. The lobbyist stuff, they tried to shut his ass down. I mean, they talk about it a little bit on the show, but they tried to shut his ass down. They were threatening the bookstore that was going to have him do a book signing, they were threatening the bookstore. So he touched on somebody's nerves.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the suggestion, sir.
Yeah. And what was that book you were talking about again? Seige of Mecca, right?
Yeah, it's called The Seige of Mecca, and it's by a guy named Yaroslav Trofimov.
Okay.
It's very highly detailed and makes all the connections between those incidents which took place in 1979 and how it's all connected to what's happening today with 9/11, with Afghanistan, with politics between America and Saudi Arabia and everything going on in the Middle East. It is phenomenal. Very highly recommended.
Sounds great, man. I'm going to put that in the show notes. I'm going to make sure I pick that up here in the next couple of weeks, too. I mean, I got to get Max Blumenthal's other book, Goliath. I keep getting told about it. Pete just mentioned it to me earlier today. I'm like, yes, I need to buy that fucking book. So I need to get a hold of that, too. But, all right, man, let me shut it down real quick, and then we'll hang up.
Okay.
All right, everybody. That was Stranger Encounters with Gord. This was 18 Wheels of Misery. I'm Tommy Salmons. Late.